So just Hi everyone, it's Leela Harris, and I'm here with Kendi DeLay-Gill and Narava Nash, and we also have another facilitator guest, a Dalian Method Facilitator as well. We have the pleasure of having Megan MacDonald with us today. So welcome, Megan.
Hi.
And this is episode 4 of our relationship series. So we're doing is a series of videos on relationships, and each video is on a theme within the subject of relationships. So today, our topic is when someone is ill. Okay. Yeah. Who would like to start off? Kind of a big topic.
I always default to you, Kendi. Kendi, you start.
I start?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you talk, like from my perspective in this conversation, when we're referring to when someone is ill, I'm going to be sort of recalling the events in my life when my husband went through cancer twice, because that to me is where my mind will go in terms of the learnings that I had from that experience. It isn't just the general, you know, like when somebody falls sick or has a cold or is managing day-to-day regular issues. It's when we get sent to that extreme edge of ourselves and end up experiencing perhaps the most extreme emotions and volatility in a home as a result of that. So that's what I will be drawing from when I'm making my comments.
Yeah, that's good to say, Kendi, and maybe all 4 of us can say where we're coming from. So for myself, it's also dealing with cancer, but with my father who was diagnosed last August and passed in November. I mean, that was 2017, and now with my mother in late stages. So it's been many months with her, and I've been here with her. So that's the perspective I'm coming from.
How about you, Megan?
I also am coming from the perspective of cancer. My mother has been in treatments for 2 years and with lymphoma, and had a stem cell transplant in March of 2018. And I, along with my father, I've been living with them. And so in a different position than I thought I'd be. And just learning about what it's like, not just to have a parent with cancer, but to live in that same space with a parent as an adult who's dealing with that illness. So it's the last 2 years is most of what the perspective I'm coming from too.
Yeah. And I think Megan's connection is a little bit going in and out, but that's okay. We can hear you, Megan. It's just the video that slows and speeds up, so it's okay. We heard everything you said clearly. And for me, I have the least experience with this in the group. I have family members who have kind of more chronic issues that keep surfacing, but I've not really dealt with someone really close that had like a life-threatening illness. So, yeah. But I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of you about, I know that the experiences you've gone through have been a huge part of your own personal work on yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of to put things in a nutshell at the very beginning, and then we can expand on it. I would say one of the biggest challenges and also opportunities that I've experienced is the opportunity and the challenge of always facing the unknown. And it forces you to be present because you cannot predict the next hour, let alone the next day or week or month. And that's really tough for a mind like mine that likes to plan. I would say control issues are not as big of a deal for me, but I definitely am a planner. I love to kind of lay things out. But so that's one of the biggest lessons, is that we just see how in society, how geared we are to you know, have to know what's going to happen and kind of sort out our life based on these little plans that we always want to make. And I can't do that now. And I've barely been able to do that at all for the last 14 months of my life. So yeah, having to come back to just be present with the moment and do my best to respond in those moments and let go of that, of my mind all the time when it wants to jump ahead. Okay, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? It's kind of a waste of time. And yet my mind still does it. It's playing it out right now. You know, I'm kind of attached to being somewhere next week, but am I going to get to go? I don't think so. But why am I thinking about it all the time? You know, it's interesting how the mind does that.
Yeah, I think that sort of probably was, at a personal perspective, the thing that was the toughest for me too. The idea that I was not actually in control of anything, and not knowing whether Surinder was going to live or die. So that then meant that it was my first experience of really understanding my own relationship with death. Like, had I really even considered that I was going to die one day? And what was my relationship around that phrase? And I can tell you honestly, it was filled with absolute dread. And I didn't know the extent of fear that existed. But so simultaneously, there was much going on for him. But as the person supporting him through it, there was a hell of a lot going on for me as well. And then there's this combination where, like in our case, there were young children that felt like they were about to lose their dad. And depending on where they were in their age group, their perspective was different. So Saffron actually asked her father the first time round, and I think she was only about 11 years old, if I recollect correctly. And she actually said, "Are you going to die, Daddy?" She's bringing tears into my eyes now because it was so upfront, the actual question, "Are you going to die?" And that put him under this immense pressure to respond, because he said, "No, I'm going to live." So somewhere in her psyche, she just accepted that as a fact. She accepted, my dad has informed me that I'm going to live, and therefore I have nothing to be concerned about. So she rode that first wave of cancer a little bit easier, because that sense of trust that the parent knows, and the parent knows, and the parent's honest about this, was very deeply ingrained in her psyche at that age. Whereas the other children, 2 children, were managing it from their personal spaces of where they had matured to. And it was different. They weren't able to accept a statement. First of all, they never even asked their father about the word death. And second of all, they came at it from their individual perspective, not as directly and as innocently as Saffron did.
The already just with the things that Nirava and Kindi have said, I had made a couple of notes just for myself, and the words that I had exactly were like trust and the unknown and coming out of control and coming out of struggle. Exactly the same things coming up for me in that, and that question of death as well, with from the side of being the child, again looking at the parents and going, right, I know you're going to die, but now I have to think about it. I have to really look at it. I can't avoid that notion of a world without my mother or a world without my father. And then what does that look like for me? How will I die if I have to think about how they are going to die? Yeah, so that's been a huge amount of the last 2 years looking at that. And I always take, using the Dalian method has been key to working through all of these things for myself. And when I look over the notes that I keep on the sessions that I've had with other people or that I've done on myself, the pattern, I hadn't looked at them looking for that kind of a pattern until today. And now I actually see this evolution over the 2 years from 2016 and a session where it just said, I have to trust, right at the beginning of the diagnosis, saying I have to trust. And then all through 2017 about trust, and then into 2018. And I could go into more detail. I'm amazed at how easy it is to see what it is I needed to learn.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And so you were working with that inner child that was still inside, huh?
I don't think I ever did a session where I was thinking of myself like as a small child in that sense, but a lot of the work that was coming up was about saying things. A lot of the things that came up were like things I needed to say, like, Mom, I want to tell you this, or Dad, I want to tell you that, or frustration that I had towards them, or anger that I had towards them, and speaking to them in using the Dalian method to speak to them and to speak words that maybe normally you wouldn't say out loud, because you repress them, because they're too difficult, or the truth feels too big. So there was a lot of talking to them coming out of those sessions, but also most recently having a session where a past life pattern came up that was all about feeling helpless and insecure, and putting the weight of that on my parents and needing to actually address that out loud in this lifetime to them. And I just did that like last night, actually. Actually, that was part of my homework, was to talk to them and say that out loud.
So you were telling them that you had the issues from the past about the helplessness and that you had put it on them. So you just needed to tell them that?
Yeah, because having done the Dalian session, the wound around that was transformed and erased and healed, so that the issue didn't need to be discussed, like it didn't need to be gone over and rehashed. That had been dealt with, but the apology to them energetically to say, I did this to you unconsciously, and I have to apologize to you for having put that on you. That was a piece of homework to say that to them. Yeah. And that already, just having done that, I don't know if you've had that experience, but being able to say that thing, it actually ends up not being a big deal. And as soon as you've said it, you feel the energy start to shift around the relationship. Something becomes lighter and less fraught. And this is part of what I feel like, because my mother was sick, that's been the opportunity. All of these things have come up that have remained dormant for the 40 years that I've been their child, because there was no crisis. There was no thing that needed to be faced right away. And now that the crisis is a little bit over, in the sense that my mother's not in treatment at the moment, but in that, because she's not in treatment at the moment too, I have time to sit with her. I have time to say things to her. When someone's undergoing cancer treatment, it's hard to sit in a room when someone's getting chemo and say things that are really difficult to them. You don't want to load things on them when they're in the middle of treatment. But now on the other side of it, all these things are now available. I feel like the illness has made it possible to be truthful, and that I feel like I have to speak these things, because I don't know when she's going to die. She might be here for 20 years, but I don't know that. And I feel that more deeply. And also, it broke me open. It broke me open in a way that says, I'm going to be truthful. I'm not going to waste time.
So the end result is there's more honesty in the relationship. because that's where it's taking you to. Yeah, I find that because my situation, it was my husband going through it, and so there wasn't this natural sense that he's at the end of his life. Because if I recollect correctly, I think he was 52 when he first got diagnosed. So there wasn't this sense of like, there's unfinished business and it's got to be sorted and it's got to be my opportunity now. And there was other things going on where you just referred to, like, you've apologized to your mother for the responsibility that you'd loaded onto her and freed yourself from that. I found myself loading on loads of responsibility onto myself as the support person to help him, almost going into sort of like a unconscious state of acting like a martyr, when that was not my role to play. So I started to go off and do the research and find the juicing recipes and make the juices and have them ready, and then do the next thing and then have that ready. And it took again Madda's help and other Dalian Method sessions for me to unweave what do I believe I'm supposed to do because I've been conditioned to do right now, versus what is it that I am to do because it's mine to do. Like, there was a huge separation that had to happen, because juicing and those type of solutions may not have been the way he wanted to tackle his cancer. The way he wanted to tackle it was different. And me thrusting things onto him was actually adding tension to his life and to mine. And when I learned how to see that this is actually his illness, it made things a lot better, because I just knew what I wanted to do then out of love and care, rather than what I was doing out of obligation.
Yeah, and Candy, was a lot of that also, like, you know, Mara was talking about and Megan was resonating with, the need to control, because there's fear there. You don't want, you know, this person could die or they could get really sick. And so then maybe that was driving you to do all these things so that you were able to work directly with those fears and things in the Dalian method. Yeah,
that's right. And indirectly, my own fear of dying was coming up. Okay. So it's not necessarily from a perspective where you're being so selfless and it's all about the other person. It's actually very, very confusing and mixed up with your own fear to be alone, your own fear to die, your own fear of the fragility of life and that you can't control, your own fear of I remember Anisha had a session, because we took the opportunity as a family for all of us to grow through this, right? And Anisha had a session, and hers was all about her fear to be alone and having to be responsible for herself if her dad died. And with Roshan, his was a lot to do with, my father won't get to see what I've become. Like, it was what he thought, like he was aspiring to be as a success model of some form. And there was lots of stuff about my dad won't get to see that. So each person has their individual, very selfish angle that they're coming from, even though it's disguised as grief for the person that's going through the illness. And Surinder had many sessions too with the Dalian method directly with Madda, and his were obviously about the fear to die, the fear that he was letting his kids down. Like, there were lots of complications in all of that. It's making me cry thinking about this right now. But it was also the web, like, of what he thought he was responsible for still for his children that was coming up, right? So each of us had our separate angles, but they were from our self perspective, not necessarily, the grief wasn't necessarily about the other person. It's about what we impose on ourselves as the expectations that we think we have for others, and our own dread around fear, and our own relationship with the fact that our life will come to an end.
And I think that's such an important point to make. And that's something that I think is very difficult for people to detect that's going on. So it is important to bring that up, because that's often what's underneath. We don't realize on the surface when we're feeling all these emotions. And I can relate just from witnessing other people suffering in other ways, where things are coming up and we just think, I feel bad for the person, or I'm afraid to lose them, or I'm worried about them. But sometimes if we go deeper, there might be like a lot of those things that you talked about, Kim.
Yeah, and they're about us. And I remember one time saying to Safi, like, you're like a breath of fresh air in this home, because she trusted that he was going to live. And so she ran around like a little butterfly. And it was such a refreshing thing to have her race around like a little butterfly. But several years later, and it broke my heart to discover this, she had a session in which she had taken on the burden to stay a butterfly. So she had noticed that everybody else was sad. And because they were sad, and I inadvertently said, oh my God, you're like a breath of fresh air that brightens up our world, she felt like she's got to brighten up our world. And so she shared many years later that in her diaries that she would cry going to bed because everybody else was sad. But she now couldn't tell them that she was sad. And because she had to keep up this, I have to be bright like a butterfly. And so it took many years later for her to have a Dalian Method session to actually share with us what she put herself through.
Yeah.
And I was mortified that I hadn't seen the signs that she was actually suppressing herself, because I was so quick to believe that she just trusted everything.
That reminds me, and I won't go into detail, but that reminds me of my perception of my younger daughter and how she handled the divorce of her father and I compared to my other daughter. Oh, she was fine. She was quiet and peaceful. Meanwhile, she had internalized everything.
Yeah.
You know, and I had, you know, made comments and, you know, later seen my error in assuming that. But back to the topic that we have today, I can totally relate to what you said. Anisha's learning was, with my father, I saw that my grief was all about not wanting to be an orphan who was going to take care of me. There was still the child in me that thought, oh my God, if dad's not here, you know, I can't survive. Even though I'm obviously an adult and have been taking care of myself for a long time. But there was also the part in my father that, you know, I had to tell him, part of my homework was, Dad, I can take care of myself. You can go, you know, and I actually told him that directly because, you know, to those last days, he felt responsible for all of us. And in fact, my husband and I, second husband, and I were separated already, and I never could tell my dad. I never felt to tell him because he had this idea that, you know, well, if she's married and in a relationship, then she's okay. It's just this old school thinking, you know, and I just didn't feel to worry him in his, you know, in his late stages, to have to deal with that in his mind, because he was suffering with illness for quite a long time, pain before we found out it was cancer. And it's interesting how that relationship unfolded. But having to tell him, Dad, I'm going to be okay. You don't need to take care of me. And for me to accept that responsibility was one of the key things. And that it was my grief. Like, I thought I was sad for my dad, but really I was sad for myself. And I see that totally, you know, it's not about, and my learning with my mom, I mean, there's so much. She also has early stages of Alzheimer's. So, you know, my idea of how to help her, since we found out about her illness I guess we technically found out early November, but officially since February. Like I had this idea in my mind about how to help her and take care of her, but I've had to keep letting go and letting go because she had her own way of dealing with it and her own, certain cognitive abilities or lack of that didn't allow me to want to do what my ego wanted to do for her. I wanted her to do a Dalian Method session. I want all these things. When I learned to and did enough sessions that I was able to just let go and do my best each, I still made loads of mistakes, and I even made one last night. But being able to just follow her lead, that was kind of the what I needed to learn, was to just be present with where she was in a moment and listen inside myself as to, okay, how do I respond here in the most compassionate way? And just knowing that we want to keep these recordings a little shorter now, I'll also say what happened for me last night. So Mom's in maybe her last days. I mean, she could go anytime now, and maybe she'll live a week, I don't know. And I had this, we had this really painful thing that happened yesterday where she had managed to type out a message, and we found it on her iPad. It didn't get sent, and it caused quite a stir in our family, and we were all worried and like, oh, we gotta do something. And I stayed really late with her last night. And then when I got home, I was sitting in meditation, and I was just asking the question, like, what does Mom need from me? And my whole being was like, tell me, what is it that she needs? And I sat for a while in that, waiting for the answer. And then it arrived, and it almost made me chuckle. It's making me laugh and cry at the same time right now, but she doesn't need anything from me. Like I thought, oh, I have to do something for her. It's her last days of life. And I got this huge awareness that she's giving me a gift for me to learn my own lessons and learn about life, to be here with her at this sacred time. And the only job I have is to just respond in the moment. Existence is taking care of her through many people. And if I walk away right now, she's going to get taken care of in some way. And it doesn't have to be me. There's nothing I need to do. If that makes sense. So I feel kind of lighter now for these last days. Like I can just show up.
Just be there without having to be the doer.
Yeah.
Because otherwise that pressure of being the doer has the tendency to burn you out too. Because I remember I would get into the hospital at like 7 o'clock in the morning with Surinder and be there till, say, like if I was at 11 o'clock at night, then he would start vomiting at 11:30. Then if I stayed till midnight, he'd start vomiting at 12:30. And if I stayed until 1 o'clock in the morning, he'd start vomiting at 1:30 in the morning. And so I saw that the more I was doing and the more I was there and the more I was there, like his panic would always arise after I had gone. And so I could have been there 24 hours a day, right? And would have destroyed myself in the process. But I had to see that his panic was arising when I was gone, so that there was something that had to be done for him to address his panic.
Right.
It wasn't for me. There was not more that I had to do, because there wasn't more I could do. That was for him to bear and understand his sense of panic, and to get to a place where his own level of worry could be dissipated, and there was nothing I could do to ever change that.
Yeah, and that's really important to share, Kindy. My mom has her own lessons in facing her aloneness right now at this time, and we can't save her from that.
Yeah.
Right? It's not our job to take away that opportunity if she's alone for a little bit, and someone happens to not be in the room right when she meets someone. That was totally heartbreaking for me. But now I got reminded last night that, okay, it's okay. we still want to support her as much as we can, but if we're following our own energy and doing what feels right for us, then we can trust that things are unfolding as they need to, right?
Yeah, I think, Leela, this debate will probably go on for a very long time, because it's so intertwined with the many conditionings that we have to support the people that we love and the complexities of what our own ego does. I think you were about to say something about trust. Ultimately, it finishes there, doesn't it, Megan?
Yeah.
The one of the things, my mother did do a Dalian session with Mada, and she did 2 with me last year. And one of her pieces of homework was to trust herself, because Mada said the more she trusted herself, the more I could trust myself. And that was part of how we were connected, actually, was that was part of what had to happen. And my homework from the session was to trust myself. So there was this deep interconnectedness of my mother's ability to trust and my ability to trust. And that has been a huge part of that sense of letting go. When Narava was just talking about her mother doesn't need anything from her, in that sense, instead of trying to fix everything for my mother, or make the recipes, or make a juice, or which I also got into doing, it was, if I kept reminding myself, let her trust herself. She'll tell you if she wants something. She knows how to ask. She is not, there's all these things that she can do, and trust her. I could still offer things, but there wasn't that sense when I offered that I was trying to fix. It was just an offer. And that came about through using the Dalian method. That came about through having this tool to be able to go deeper into, what am I actually asking for? What am I looking for? How am I trying to control or fix this illness? And therefore fix my mother, and not let her trust herself. Because if I keep offering things every 5 minutes, I'm not giving her an opportunity to trust herself. And so that really did change our dynamic. The other 2 things that I'll just mention that came up for me really specifically was that there was this belief in me that people would only want to be around me if I could take care of them, and that there was a fear that if I couldn't help my parents, they wouldn't love me. And those only became visible in the situation. And in my case, my body brought them out as physical pain. And when I went into the physical pain, those are the awarenesses that came out of that physical pain. And I'm just so grateful that I was able to have those, to see those, because it has radically shifted how I'm able to be with my parents in what they're going through. So it's actually really beautiful, even in that struggle, to go, why am I struggling so much with this illness? And then to go, oh, because I have these unconscious beliefs around needing to help people, or they won't love me. And then going, that's not how it works.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. Especially, it's a good reminder that everyone we cross paths with, whether we're related to them or however the relationship is, we're really here to teach each other something. And
actually, something as devastating as cancer, ironically, in our home, helped the 5 of us to grow exponentially, because all 5 of us had Mada's help, all 5 of us used the Dalian method, all 5 of us processed what was happening live as it was happening through all the varying episodes, and then for the second time. So it catapulted us forward as individuals in our own growth and increase in consciousness and understanding of ourselves. I don't think we could have ever experienced as rapidly without facing what we all ended up facing.
Mm-hmm. That's really amazing that you have you had that you all did that. Mm-hmm. It's an important several important signposts for people along the way that you know, and for, I think you're the only person so far that has been able to do that, to have that experience of your whole family using DM to transform and face all the challenges. So
yeah, it's like a very, very intimate understanding of each other and a very, very transparent perspective of what's actually happening in our inner psyche.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just so grateful to Mada for the fact that she's facilitated such amazing freedom to unfold in our family unit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we're getting close to the end. Any final words? I mean, there was so much that this was a beautiful conversation. I don't know if there's anything you can think of that you felt like you want to say that you haven't said about the loss or the illness and the possible loss of a parent or a loved one.
I feel completely. Go ahead, Megan.
What Narava said before about challenges and opportunities, I just wanted to echo that over the past 2 years, the ability to look at the illness as an opportunity and every moment of grief and sadness as an opportunity, because it really is.
Yeah.
And I'd like to add that however devastating something can be like that, there's an opportunity for greater connection and an opportunity for greater understanding and mutual respect, and just an awareness of the frailty of who we are as human beings and our capacity to be in our hearts more than elsewhere. Like, so much good can come out of it, but only if you're prepared to be honest with what you're really feeling and prepared to be vulnerable enough to let yourself feel what is honestly arising. Because often we're so scared to feel, we're so scared to be emotional, we're so scared to be vulnerable that the fear of that alone stops us from actually digging deep enough to find the treasure underneath it. And I apologize for the fact that so many tears keep rolling today.
You don't need to apologize for that.
Yeah.
But I do just really, the biggest gift of all of this, first of all, I wouldn't change a single thing. I wouldn't want to miss this opportunity of all these challenges, because being with people in this authentic way, when you're facing death, when someone's facing death in a relationship, there's so much opportunity for realness. And often there's denial, and that's a part of it. But that's also a learning too, how to be with a loved one when they're in denial. And yeah, I wouldn't have it any other way. Being here to experience these rich moments of life, and having the opportunity to, because we all have the fear of the unknown, whether we're aware of it or not, and having to face that every day. And, you know, it's still very strong in me. But I wouldn't change a thing. I want to face it.
And even that word denial, like there were parts of our journey where it looked like Sundar was being extremely, he was in denial.
Yeah.
But now when I look back on it, actually that was the best thing he could have done at that moment, because it wasn't time for him to break down and be vulnerable. And because that was not the time for that healing to arise. Some of those things had to arise later. So again, the inability on my part to trust, and therefore labeling it as denial, was wrong, because in the moment, what he was going through was absolutely what he needed to do.
Yeah.
That's a good point, Kindy. And that can come in, sneaky kind of little things. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know that I'm wrong now, because at the time I felt like I knew better.
Yeah.
But no, existence always knows better. And what existence is doing through each of us, whatever we put labels on, is exactly what has to happen in that moment.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. I knew before we even did the video that this was going to be a heart-opening and emotional talk. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for being vulnerable. I know it's not easy, and I know a lot of the tears are actually tears of joy and relief. And when we do this work, and there's so much, like Kindy was talking about, the vulnerability, your heart just opens. And yeah, the tears come and you feel, yeah, there's so much. So thank you.
Thanks, Leila. And thanks, Megan, for joining us today.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Megan.
It was a bit heavy, the topic, but thank you for being here, Megan.
Oh, and before you end the recording, if anyone out there is struggling with these things, please reach out to any one of us. We're all facilitators. And if you resonate with anybody, they can help you work with these things. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out or ask questions.
Bye.
Bye-bye.